The wine hit her boots before anyone could breathe. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't a slip of the hand or a careless gesture. Grant Sterling, CEO of Sterling Vance Holdings, tilted his glass with surgical precision and let the Merlot pour onto the worn leather of Alora's work boots. The liquid splashed across the marble floor, dark and deliberate, pooling around her feet like spilled blood. The executive lounge went silent. 6 Silicon Valley investors froze mid-conversation, their champagne flutes suspended in the air. The kind of silence that swallows sound, the kind that makes your heart beat loud in your own ears. Grant's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Clean it up," he said, his voice cold and sharp as a scalpel. "With your hands. Then get out of my building before I have you arrested for theft." Alora didn't move. She stood there in her faded Navy uniform, name tag crooked on her chest, mop still in her right hand. The wine dripped from the leather, staining the white tile beneath her. She looked at the mess. Then she looked at him. And she smiled. Not a nervous smile, not a scared smile. A smile that made the temperature in the room drop 10 degrees. A smile that said she knew something Grant didn't. Something that would destroy him. "You're right, Grant," she said, her voice steady as stone. "Someone is leaving this building today." She reached into her pocket, her movements slow and deliberate. "But it isn't me." She didn't pull out a cloth. She didn't pull out her phone. She pulled out a black titanium card, the kind that doesn't exist in any wallet except one. The kind that opens doors most people don't even know are there. Grant's eyes narrowed. Then they widened. Just a fraction. Just enough. Alora turned toward the private elevator at the far end of the lounge. The one with no buttons. The one only the silent partner could access. The one Grant had never seen anyone use in his entire career. His laughter came out jagged, nervous, wrong. "Security!" His voice cracked on the second syllable. "Remove this woman from the premises immediately." But the 2 guards standing near the door didn't move. They stood at attention, eyes forward, hands clasped behind their backs. Professional, obedient, waiting. One of the investors set down his glass. Another cleared his throat. The air in the room shifted, thick and electric, like the moment before lightning strikes. Grant's face flushed red. "I said remove her!" The head of legal stepped through the doorway, a leather-bound folder pressed against his chest. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. "Grant," he said quietly, and his voice sounded like someone delivering a death sentence. The 3-year probate period ended at noon today. Alora stopped at the elevator. She didn't turn around. She slid the black card into the reader, and the doors opened with a soft hiss. "Meet your new majority shareholder," the attorney whispered. The elevator doors began to close, and just before they sealed shut, Alora looked back over her shoulder. Her eyes locked on Grant's, and in that moment, he saw it. The truth. The reckoning. The end of everything he thought he controlled. The doors closed. The room stayed silent. And Grant Sterling realized, for the first time in his life, that he had just destroyed himself. Have you ever been underestimated by someone in power? Have you ever watched someone treat you like you were invisible, like you didn't matter, like your voice didn't count? Drop a comment below. Tell me what happened. Tell me how it felt. Welcome to Untold Empire. Please do well to hit the subscribe button and leave a comment on your thoughts and where you're watching from. See you at the end of the video. But to understand how a billionaire CEO ended up frozen in his own executive lounge, staring at an elevator he couldn't access, watching his empire crack open like glass, we need to go back. Not years, not months. Just 47 minutes. 47 minutes before Alora Vance pulled out that card. 47 minutes before everything Grant Sterling built turned to ash. Because the woman he just humiliated didn't just own the building. She owned him. And she'd been planning this moment for exactly 1,095 days. Grant Sterling didn't walk into rooms. He arrived. And when he arrived, people moved. They straightened their spines, lowered their voices, checked their watches like they were suddenly late for something important. Fear was his currency, and he spent it without mercy. The headquarters of Sterling Vance Holdings rose 60 stories above Manhattan, a tower of steel and glass that cut through the skyline like a blade. From his corner office on the 60th floor, Grant could see the entire city stretched out beneath him. Millions of people. Thousands of buildings, all of them smaller than him. He liked it that way. His net worth sat somewhere north of $8 billion, though the exact number shifted depending on the stock market's mood. He owned hotels in Dubai, office towers in Singapore, luxury apartment complexes across 18 American cities. His signature was on contracts that moved nations. His handshake closed deals that bankrupted competitors. People didn't say no to Grant Sterling. They didn't argue. They didn't hesitate. They nodded. They agreed. They did exactly what he told them to do. And if they didn't, they disappeared. Not violently, not dramatically. They just stopped existing in his world. Fired, blacklisted, forgotten. That morning, he had fired 3 people before breakfast. A junior analyst who missed a deadline. A marketing coordinator who questioned a campaign budget. An IT technician who made eye contact for too long in the elevator. None of them mattered. None of them would be remembered. By noon, their security badges would be deactivated, their emails rerouted, their desks cleared. That's how power worked. Swift. Absolute. Final. But beneath the empire, beneath the reputation, beneath the cold marble floors and the imported chandeliers, there was a crack. A secret. A $40 million problem that kept Grant awake at 3 in the morning, staring at his ceiling, calculating how much time he had left. He had been skimming, not from clients, not from investors, from the company itself. Pension funds, operational budgets, reserve accounts. Small amounts at first, then larger, then desperate. The money went to offshore accounts, then to private poker games in Macau, then to loan sharks who didn't care about his reputation, only about their interest rates. $40 million. Gone. And the annual audit was 6 weeks away. That's why the Silicon Valley investors were here. Grant needed their cash infusion. Needed it to cover the hole, to buy himself time, to make the numbers look clean. He had spent 3 months courting them, whining and dining them, selling them a vision of expansion and profit margins that didn't exist. They were in the building right now. 6th floor conference room, waiting for the final presentation, waiting for Grant to close the deal that would save him. He straightened his tie in the mirror, practiced his smile. Confident, commanding, a man who had never lost anything in his life. But there was something else, something he didn't think about often because it didn't matter. A detail buried so deep in the corporate structure that even Grant had forgotten it existed. Sterling Vance Holdings wasn't entirely his. It never had been. The company had been founded 30 years ago by 2 men, Grant's father, Richard Sterling, and his business partner, Samuel Vance. They had built the empire together, brick by brick, deal by deal. But Samuel Vance had died 10 years ago, and his shares, his 90% controlling stake, had been locked in probate, frozen, inaccessible, held in trust for a single heir who had never shown up, never made a claim, never even sent a lawyer. For 10 years, Grant had operated as if the company was his, because functionally it was. The board answered to him. The employees feared him. The world saw his name on the building, his face in the press releases. Samuel Vance's shares were a legal formality, a footnote, a ghost, until today, until noon, until the 3-year probate waiting period expired and the heir, whoever they were, could finally claim what was theirs. But Grant wasn't worried. He had lawyers, he had paperwork, he had leverage. Whoever this heir was, they would negotiate. They would settle. They would take a buyout and disappear, just like everyone else. He checked his watch. 11:13. 47 minutes until the investors arrived at the executive lounge for drinks. 47 minutes until he closed the deal. 47 minutes until his problems disappeared. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the elevator. He didn't notice the woman mopping the hallway. Didn't see her step aside as he passed. Didn't hear the soft sound of her watching him go. Because to Grant Sterling, people like her didn't exist. They were furniture, wallpaper, invisible. And that invisibility was about to cost him everything. Alora Vance moved through the building like water. Quiet. Constant. Unnoticed. She pushed her cleaning cart down the marble hallways of the 59th floor, her uniform wrinkled from hours of work, her hands rough from chemicals and scrubbing. The name tag pinned to her chest said staff in plain black letters. No name, no title, just a function. She had worn that tag for 3 years, 1,095 days, and in that time she had become invisible. The executives walked past her without a glance. The assistants ignored her. The interns looked through her like she was made of glass. She was part of the architecture, a mop, a bucket, a shadow. But Alora wasn't there by accident, and she wasn't there because she needed the money. She was there because her father's will had demanded it. Samuel Vance had died of a heart attack in his study, surrounded by legal documents and half-finished contracts. The company he had built, the empire he had bled for, had been left to his only daughter. 90% of Sterling Vance holdings. Enough control to run the company, fire the board, reshape the entire operation. But there was a clause, a strange, specific, unbreakable clause, written in his final will. Alora couldn't inherit until she had worked at the company, undetected for 3 full years. She had to start at the bottom, had to experience the business from the perspective of the people who served it, had to see how power was used, how people were treated, how dignity was measured when no one was watching. Her father had called it the character clause, a test, a lesson, a way to ensure that his daughter understood what it meant to lead, not just to own. So Alora had applied for a janitorial position under a false name, had passed the background check with fabricated references, had shown up on her first day with a mop and a bucket and a willingness to disappear. And she had watched. For 3 years, she had watched everything. She watched Grant Sterling scream at assistants until they cried in the bathroom. She watched him dock pay from custodial staff for imaginary infractions. She watched him fire a single mother 2 weeks before Christmas because she asked for a day off to attend her daughter's school play. She watched him skim money from the pension fund, watched him manipulate the books, watched him lie to investors with a smile that never reached his eyes. She watched him treat people like they were disposable, like they didn't matter, like their lives were just numbers on a spreadsheet. And she remembered every single moment. Alora moved her cart toward the executive lounge. It was 11:30. 30 minutes until the probate period expired. 30 minutes until the lawyers would deliver the final paperwork. 30 minutes until she could stop pretending. She had planned this day carefully, had coordinated with the head of legal, the board, the security team, had ensured that everything would happen exactly as it needed to. No delays, no mistakes, no escape. Today was her last day as a custodian. Today was her first day as the owner of Sterling Vance Holdings. Today was the day Grant Sterling would finally see her. She paused outside the lounge door and adjusted her name tag. Staff. The word felt heavy now, like a weapon she had been sharpening for 3 years. She thought about her father, about the lessons he had tried to teach her, about the empire he had built with his bare hands. Power without humility is just tyranny waiting to collapse, he used to say. Alora pushed the cart through the door. Inside, the investors were already gathering. 6 men in expensive suits holding champagne flutes, laughing at jokes that weren't funny. Grant stood near the window, his back to her, his voice loud and confident. She moved to the corner of the room and began wiping down the bar. Slow, methodical, invisible. Grant didn't even glance at her. He was too busy performing, too busy selling. Too busy pretending he was untouchable. But Alora knew something he didn't. something that would shatter his world in exactly 17 minutes. She reached into her pocket and felt the edge of the black titanium card, the one her father had left her, the one that opened every door in this building, the one Grant had never seen because he had never needed to. She checked the clock on the wall. 11:47, 13 minutes. And then she waited. Because the best part of power wasn't using it. The best part was knowing exactly when to strike. And in 13 minutes, Grant Sterling would finally understand what it felt like to be invisible, to be powerless, to be nothing. The vase shattered before anyone saw it fall. One moment it stood on the marble pedestal near the window, elegant and ancient. Glazed ceramic worth more than most people earned in a year. The next moment it was fragments, scattered across the floor like broken bones, pieces skittering toward the investor's polished shoes. Grant had been gesturing, his hand sweeping wide as he talked about market penetration and quarterly projections. His scotch glass tilted at a dangerous angle. His elbow caught the edge of the pedestal. The vase tipped, fell, died. The sound cut through the conversation like a gunshot. Everyone stopped. 6 investors stood frozen, their eyes locked on the shattered ceramic. Grant stared at the mess, his face blank, his mind already calculating. The vase had been a gift from the original founder, Samuel Vance. A gift that sat in the executive lounge as a reminder of legacy, of history, of the man who had built this company from nothing. And Grant had just destroyed it. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Then Grant's eyes shifted, scanned the room, landed on Alora. She stood near the bar, her mop resting against the wall, her hands empty. She had been wiping down the counter, 5 feet away from the pedestal, nowhere near the vase when it fell. But she was the only person in the room who wasn't wearing a suit. The only person who looked like she didn't belong. The only person who could be blamed. Grant's face hardened, his jaw clenched. He pointed at her, his fingers sharp as a knife. "You," he said, his voice low and cold. "You clumsy, invisible nothing." Alora looked up, met his eyes, said nothing. "You knocked over a priceless artifact," Grant continued, his voice rising now, filling the space, demanding agreement. "Do you have any idea what that vase was worth? Do you have any concept of value? Of history?" One of the investors shifted uncomfortably. Another looked at the floor. They knew what they had seen. They knew Grant had been the one gesturing, the one moving, the one who destroyed the vase. But they also knew better than to contradict him. Men like Grant Sterling didn't accept correction. They accepted compliance. Alora's voice came out calm, steady, quiet enough that everyone had to lean in to hear it. "Sir," she said, "you stepped backward. I was 5 feet away." The room went still again, a different kind of still, the kind where everyone holds their breath and waits to see what happens next. Grant's face flushed red. His hand tightened around his scotch glass, knuckles white. Nobody corrected Grant Sterling, not employees, not investors, not anyone, and certainly not a custodian. "Are you calling me a liar?" His voice came out soft, dangerous, the tone he used before he ended careers. Alora didn't flinch. "I'm saying what happened." For a moment, Grant said nothing. He just stared at her, his eyes cold and calculating. She had defied him. In front of investors, in front of witnesses, in front of people whose respect he needed. She had made him look weak, and that could not stand. His lips curled into something cruel, something that enjoyed what came next. He looked at her worn work boots, scuffed and stained from years of mopping floors and scrubbing toilets. He looked at her faded uniform, the crooked name tag, the calloused hands. He looked at her like she was an insect he was about to crush. "You know what?" Grant said, his voice loud now, performative, meant for the audience. "I'm tired of people like you. People who don't appreciate what they have, people who think they can talk back, think they matter, think they deserve respect." He took a step toward her. The investors watched. Alora didn't move. "You're done here," Grant said. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out, and if you ever set foot in this building again, I'll have you arrested for trespassing." He waited for her to cry, to beg, to apologize. That's what people did when Grant Sterling destroyed them. They broke. They crumbled. They proved that he was right to discard them. But Alora just looked at him, and that terrifyingly calm smile returned, the one that made the air feel wrong. "Okay," she said softly. That defiance, that quiet dignity, that refusal to shrink, ignited something in Grant that went beyond anger. It touched his ego, the part of him that needed absolute control, absolute dominance, absolute proof that he was the most powerful person in any room, and what he did next would cost him everything. Grant reached for the wine bottle on the bar. It was a 2009 Bordeaux worth $3,000, opened specifically for the investors. He poured a full glass, the liquid dark as blood, then held it up to the light like he was inspecting it, appreciating it, performing. Then he looked at Alora, at her worn boots, at the floor beneath her feet, and he tilted the glass. The wine poured out in a steady stream, splashing across the leather, pooling on the white marble, spreading like a stain that couldn't be undone. It wasn't an accident, it wasn't careless, it was deliberate, calculated, a demonstration of power in its purest form. "Clean it up," Grant said, his voice sharp as broken glass. "With your hands, then get out of my building before I have you arrested for theft." The investors stood frozen. One of them opened his mouth like he wanted to say something, then closed it. Another looked away, suddenly fascinated by the cityscape outside the window. They were complicit in their silence. Witnesses who chose to see nothing. Alora looked down at the wine soaking into her boots. The liquid dripped from the leather, dark and sticky, pooling around her feet. She had scrubbed these floors for 3 years, had cleaned up after executives who threw parties and spilled champagne and never said thank you, had mopped up messes that weren't hers, fixed problems she didn't create, made herself invisible so that people like Grant could pretend she didn't exist. And now he wanted her to clean up his cruelty with her bare hands. She looked at the wine. Then she looked at Grant. And something shifted in her expression. Something cold and final and absolute. She had spent 1,095 days watching him humiliate employees who couldn't fight back, watching him steal from people who trusted him, watching him build an empire on the backs of people he considered beneath him. And for 1,095 days she had stayed silent, had played her role, had waited for this exact moment, the moment when Grant Sterling would finally see her. She reached into her pocket, slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room tracked the movement. She didn't pull out a cloth. She didn't pull out her phone. She pulled out a black titanium card, matte finish, no logos, no bank names. The kind of card that didn't exist in any normal wallet. The kind that only one person in the world was supposed to have. Grant's eyes narrowed. Then they widened. Just a fraction. Just enough. He recognized it. Not because he had ever held it, but because his father had told him about it. Years ago. The universal key. The card that opened every door in Sterling Vance Holdings. The card that belonged to the silent partner. The card that had been locked away in probate for a decade. The card that shouldn't exist anymore. Alora turned toward the private elevator at the far end of the lounge. The one with no call button. The one that went directly to the executive suite, the boardroom, the files that only the owner could access. The one Grant had never used because he didn't have clearance. His laughter came out wrong, jagged, nervous. Desperate. "Security!" The word cracked in his throat. "Remove this woman from the premises immediately." The 2 guards near the door didn't move. They stood at attention, hands clasped behind their backs, eyes forward. Professional. Obedient. Waiting for orders from someone who actually had authority. One of the investors set down his champagne flute. The sound of glass on marble echoed too loud in the silence. Grant's face flushed darker. "I said remove her." His voice climbed higher, losing its control, losing its power. The door to the lounge opened. The head of legal stepped inside, a leather-bound folder pressed against his chest like a shield. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. He looked like a man delivering a death sentence. "Grant," he said quietly, and his voice carried the weight of something irreversible. "The 3-year probate period ended at noon today." Alora stopped at the elevator. She slid the black card into the reader. The doors opened with a soft, mechanical hiss, a sound that felt final. The attorney's next words came out barely above a whisper, but everyone in the room heard them. "Meet your new majority shareholder." For 3 seconds, Grant Sterling's brain refused to process the information. It was impossible. The heir had never shown up, never made a claim, never even existed in his world. The 90% stake was supposed to be a formality, a legal ghost, something his lawyers would handle with paperwork and settlements. But the woman standing at the elevator, the woman with wine on her boots and a mop in the corner, was looking at him with eyes that knew everything. Every lie, every theft, every moment of cruelty. And Grant realized in that terrible crystallizing moment that she had been there the entire time, watching, waiting, documenting. The elevator doors began to close. Alora looked back over her shoulder, her eyes locking on Grant's. "I'll see you in the boardroom in 20 minutes, she said, her voice steady and cold. "Don't be late." The doors sealed shut. The room stayed silent. And Grant Sterling felt his empire begin to crack. Please do well to hit the subscribe button to support, if you have made it to this time. Thank you, God bless. Grant couldn't breathe. His chest tightened like someone had wrapped steel cables around his ribs and pulled. The room felt too small, too hot, too full of eyes that were no longer looking at him with respect. The investors stood scattered around the lounge, their faces carefully neutral, their champagne glasses forgotten. He tried to speak. His mouth opened, closed, no words came out. The head of legal still stood in the doorway, the folder pressed against his chest. Grant turned toward him, his voice finally breaking free, raw and desperate. "Who the hell is she?" The attorney's hands tightened on the leather binding. "Her name is Alora Vance, daughter of Samuel Vance, sole heir to his estate. As of 12:03 p.m. today, she owns 90% of Sterling Vance Holdings." The words hit Grant like a physical blow. Vance. Samuel Vance. The partner his father had built the company with. The man who had died 10 years ago and left everything in probate. The ghost shareholder who was supposed to stay dead, but ghosts didn't carry mop buckets. Ghosts didn't scrub floors and empty trash cans and fade into the background. Ghosts didn't watch you for 3 years, cataloging every mistake, every crime, every moment you thought no one was paying attention. Grant's mind raced backward, scanning memories, searching for any moment he might have noticed her. But there was nothing. She had been furniture, wallpaper, invisible. He had walked past her 1,000 times and never once looked at her face. And now she owned him. One of the investors cleared his throat. "Grant, I think we should reschedule our meeting." Another nodded. "Yes, perhaps after you've sorted out your internal matters." They were already moving toward the door, already distancing themselves, already calculating how fast they could cut ties before the ship went down. Grant wanted to stop them, wanted to explain, wanted to salvage the deal that was supposed to save him. But his voice wouldn't work. His authority had evaporated. The investors filed out, their footsteps too loud on the marble floor. The door closed behind them, and Grant was alone with the attorney and 2 security guards who no longer answered to him. He turned toward the head of legal, his hands shaking now, rage and fear mixing into something toxic. "This is insane. You can't just hand over the company to some random woman who hasn't been involved in operations for 10 years. I've been running this place. I've built... You've been embezzling, the attorney interrupted, his voice flat, clinical. $40 million from the pension fund, operational reserves, and discretionary accounts. Miss Vance has a complete audit trail, 3 years of documentation, every transaction, every falsified report, every diverted dollar. The floor dropped out from under Grant. The blood drained from his face. That's impossible. No one knew about... She knew. The attorney's eyes held no sympathy. She's known for 3 years. She's been building a case, and as of today, she has the authority to act on it. Grant's mind scrambled for leverage, for any weapon he could use. And then he remembered. The scandal. The rumor he had been holding in reserve. The insurance policy he had assembled in case Samuel Vance's heir ever became a problem. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his fingers clumsy on the screen. If she thinks she's taking this company, she's wrong. I have information. About her father, about deals he made that weren't exactly legal, about partnerships that would destroy the Vance family name if they went public. He found the file. Years of research, private investigators, financial records that showed Samuel Vance had once accepted funding from a shell corporation linked to offshore accounts. It wasn't proof of anything criminal, but it was close enough. Muddy enough. Scandalous enough to create doubt. Grant held up his phone, his confidence returning in ragged gasps. If she comes after me, I'll leak this to every media outlet in the country. I'll bury her family's reputation. I'll make sure the Vance name becomes synonymous with corruption. The attorney didn't react. He just stood there, expressionless, like he was watching a man drown and couldn't be bothered to throw a rope. "Go ahead," a voice said from behind Grant. He spun around. Alora stood in the doorway. She had changed. No more Navy uniform, no more crooked name tag. She wore a charcoal suit, tailored and sharp, her hair pulled back, her posture different. Commanding. She looked like someone who owned things. Important things. "Go ahead and leak it," Alora repeated, walking into the room with measured steps. "I've been waiting 3 years for you to try." Grant's hand tightened on his phone. "I'm serious. I will destroy your father's legacy." Alora stopped 3 feet away from him. "My father accepted funding from that shell corporation because he was investigating it. He was working with federal regulators to expose a money laundering operation. The documents you have are incomplete. Deliberately so. He wanted people like you to find them, to use them, so he could prove you were willing to weaponize lies." She took another step closer. "And this morning at 9 a.m., I released the full audit trail of your embezzlement to the SEC, the FBI, and the New York Attorney General's office. It's front-page news in about 14 minutes." Grant's phone slipped from his hand. It clattered on the marble floor, the screen cracking on impact. "You wanted to play leverage?" Alora's voice was ice. "I've been building mine for 3 years. Every stolen dollar, every falsified report, every employee you destroyed. I have recordings, emails, bank transfers, witness testimony from 37 people you thought were too scared to talk." She pulled a document from her jacket and held it out. Grant didn't take it. His hands hung useless at his sides. "That's your termination notice," Alora said. "Effective immediately. Your office is being sealed. Your accounts are frozen. And the police are waiting in the lobby to discuss your financial activities." Grant's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the bar, his breathing shallow, his vision tunneling. "You can't... I built this company. I made it what it is." "No," Alora said quietly. "You stole from it. You bled it. You treated people like they were disposable. And now you're going to learn what it feels like to have nothing." She turned toward the security guards. "Escort Mr. Sterling to the lobby. Make sure he doesn't access any computers or files on the way out." The guards moved forward. Grant tried to pull away, but his body wouldn't obey. His empire, his reputation, his entire identity was collapsing in real time. And the woman he had spit on, the woman he had called invisible, was the one holding the knife. They walked him through the building like a prisoner. Grant Sterling, CEO of Sterling Vance Holdings, billionaire, untouchable god of the 60th floor, was being escorted past the cubicles and conference rooms where employees stopped mid-sentence to stare. Word traveled fast in buildings like this. Faster than elevators. Faster than email. The man who had ruled with fear was being removed in handcuffs. Not literal handcuffs. Not yet. But the security guards flanked him close enough that everyone knew he had fallen, knew the power structure had shifted, knew that the man who had fired people for making eye contact was now the one being walked out. An assistant Grant had screamed at last month watched him pass. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just watched, her face carefully blank, her eyes tracking him until he disappeared around the corner. A junior analyst he had humiliated in a meeting stood near the break room. He held a coffee cup frozen halfway to his lips, his expression caught between shock and something that looked like relief. A woman from accounting, the single mother Grant had fired 2 weeks before Christmas, wasn't there to see it, but her coworkers were. And they would tell her. They would call her tonight and tell her that the man who had destroyed her holiday had finally faced something he couldn't buy his way out of. The elevator ride down was silent. Grant stared at the numbers descending. 59, 58, 57. Each floor a reminder of how far he was falling. His reflection stared back at him from the polished steel doors. He looked smaller than he remembered. Older, breakable. The doors opened on the ground floor. The marble lobby stretched out like a cathedral, all space and light and cold perfection. And standing near the front desk were 2 NYPD detectives, their badges clipped to their belts, their expressions professional and final. Grant stopped walking. The security guard stopped with him. One of the detectives stepped forward. "Grant Sterling?" His voice came out hoarse. "Yes." "I'm Detective Morris. This is Detective Chen. We'd like to ask you some questions regarding financial discrepancies at Sterling Vance Holdings. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The words blurred together. Grant heard them but couldn't process them. This wasn't real. This wasn't happening. Men like him didn't get arrested. Men like him had lawyers and political connections and enough money to make problems disappear. But the handcuffs were real. Cold metal clicking around his wrists, tight enough to bite into skin. And the employees gathering near the lobby windows were real. Watching, witnessing, recording on their phones. Detective Chen gestured toward the door. "We have a car waiting outside." They walked him through the lobby, past the reception desk where he had never bothered to learn the receptionist's name, past the security station where guards had stood at attention every morning when he arrived, past the revolving doors that had always opened for him, that had always let him in, that now spun him out into the cold afternoon air. The police car sat at the curb, lights off, engine running. A small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Not employees. Just people. New Yorkers who recognized expensive suits and expensive problems. They put him in the back seat. The door closed with a heavy metallic thunk, and through the window Grant saw her. Alora stood on the steps of the building, 60 stories above her, visible through the glass entrance. She wasn't watching him. She was looking up at the tower, at the empire her father had built, at the legacy Grant had nearly destroyed. And then she turned and walked back inside. The car pulled away from the curb. Grant twisted in his seat, trying to see the building, trying to hold on to the last image of the place that had defined him. But the towers of Manhattan swallowed it. One building among thousands, and Grant Sterling was just another person in the back of a police car. Invisible. The boardroom had never felt this quiet. Alora sat at the head of the table, her hands folded on the polished mahogany, her suit jacket perfectly pressed. The 60-story view stretched out behind her, the city glittering in the late afternoon sun. Around the table sat the board of directors, 8 people who had spent years following Grant's orders without question. They looked nervous, uncertain. The power structure had been obliterated in less than an hour, and they didn't know where they stood anymore. Alora let the silence sit for a moment. Let them feel it. Then she spoke. "My name is Alora Vance," she said, her voice calm and clear. "Some of you knew my father, most of you didn't. For the past 3 years, I've worked in this building as a custodian. I scrubbed your floors. I emptied your trash. I cleaned up after your meetings. And I watched." One of the board members shifted uncomfortably. Another stared at the table. "I watched how this company treated its employees," Alora continued. "I watched how decisions were made, who got promoted, who got fired, who got heard, and who got ignored. And I watched Grant Sterling steal $40 million from people who trusted him." She slid a folder across the table. "That's the full audit. Every transaction, every falsified report, every diverted dollar. The authorities have it now. But I wanted you to see it too, because some of you signed off on budgets that didn't make sense. Some of you approved transfers that should have raised questions. And some of you just looked the other way." The room stayed silent. "I'm not here to destroy this company," Alora said. "I'm here to fix it. But that means things are going to change, starting today." She pressed a button on the conference table. The door opened and a woman stepped inside. She was older, maybe 67, with gray hair pulled back in a neat bun and hands that looked like they had worked hard for a long time. She wore a cleaning uniform, navy blue, identical to the one Alora had worn that morning. The board members stared. A few of them recognized her. Mrs. Chen, the woman who cleaned the executive offices. The woman who had worked at Sterling Vance for 30 years. The woman who was supposed to retire next year with a pension that Grant had been slowly draining. Alora stood and gestured to the empty chair beside her. "Mrs. Chen, please sit down." The older woman looked confused, nervous, but she walked to the chair and sat, her posture stiff, her eyes darting around the room. Alora reached into her jacket and pulled out an envelope. She handed it to Mrs. Chen. "This is your full pension, plus the interest Grant Sterling stole over the past 6 years. It's been restored. Every dollar." Mrs. Chen's hands shook as she opened the envelope. She stared at the number, her eyes filled with tears. "And effective immediately," Alora continued, "you're promoted to Director of Employee Wellness. Your job will be to make sure every person who works in this building is treated with dignity. You'll report directly to me. Your salary is $200,000 a year, and you'll have the authority to fire anyone, including executives, if they violate our new standards." Mrs. Chen covered her mouth with her hand. The tears spilled over, running down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but no words came out. Alora placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've given 30 years to this company. You've worked hard. You've been loyal. And you were treated like you didn't matter. That ends today." Mrs. Chen stood and hugged Alora, her body shaking with sobs. The board members watched in silence. Some of them looked ashamed. Others looked afraid. All of them understood that the rules had changed. Alora turned back to the table. "This is how power should be used, not to control, not to humiliate, not to take, but to lift people up, to create opportunity, to build something that lasts." She walked back to her chair and sat down. "Over the next 30 days, we'll be conducting a full review of every department. We'll be restoring stolen pensions. We'll be implementing living wages for all staff. We'll be creating paths for promotion that don't require you to sacrifice your dignity." One of the board members raised his hand. "And if we disagree with these changes?" Alora's expression didn't change. "Then you're welcome to resign. But understand this. I own 90% of this company. I don't need your approval. I don't need your permission. I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to lead." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "My father built this company because he believed business could be a force for good. He believed you could make money and still treat people with respect. Grant Sterling forgot that. Or maybe he never believed it. But I do. She turned back to face the room. So here's what's going to happen. We're going to rebuild. We're going to be profitable. And we're going to prove that you don't have to be cruel to be successful. The board members nodded, some reluctantly, some with genuine relief, all of them understanding that Alora Vance wasn't making suggestions. She was giving orders. As the meeting ended and the board filed out, Alora remained at the window. Mrs. Chen stayed beside her, still clutching the envelope, still wiping tears from her face. "Thank you," Mrs. Chen whispered. Alora shook her head. "You earned it. Every dollar. Every bit of respect. Grant just made you feel like you hadn't." Mrs. Chen left, and Alora was alone. She looked down at the street below, at the police car that had taken Grant away hours ago, at the people moving through the city like blood through veins. And then she looked at the shattered vase still sitting on the floor of the executive lounge. No one had cleaned it up. She had told them not to, because tomorrow morning, every executive in this building would walk past those broken pieces, and they would remember what happens when you forget whose shoulders you're standing on. The next morning, the shattered vase was still there. Alora had left instructions with the custodial staff. Don't touch it, don't sweep it. Leave every broken piece exactly where it fell. And as the executives arrived for work, as they stepped off the elevators and walked past the lounge, they saw it. Some of them paused, stared, remembered. Others walked faster, eyes down, unwilling to acknowledge what the broken ceramic represented. But they all knew. They all understood. Power was fragile. Empires were temporary. And the people you stepped on while climbing could be the same people who determined whether you stayed at the top. Alora stood in her new office on the 60th floor, the one that used to belong to Grant. She hadn't changed much, hadn't brought in new furniture or redecorated. She had simply removed the photographs of Grant shaking hands with politicians and celebrities, had taken down the awards and plaques that celebrated his achievements, had stripped away the performance and left only the function. On her desk sat a single photograph, her father, Samuel Vance. Standing in front of the building on opening day, his arm around a younger Grant's father, both of them smiling, both of them believing they were building something that would last. Alora picked up the photograph and studied her father's face. He had known, somehow, he had known that power could corrupt, that wealth could blind, that the only way to ensure someone understood the value of leadership was to make them experience life without it. The character clause. 3 years at the bottom. 3 years of watching, learning, suffering, understanding. And now she stood at the top. Not because she had climbed over people, but because she had walked beside them. Her phone buzzed, a text from the head of legal. The SEC had officially charged Grant Sterling with wire fraud, embezzlement, and securities violations. He was facing 20 years, his assets were frozen, his reputation was destroyed. Everything he had built on cruelty and theft was gone. Alora set the phone down. She didn't feel triumphant. She didn't feel victorious. She felt tired and sad, because Grant could have been different. Could have chosen dignity over dominance. Could have used his power to build people up instead of tearing them down. But he hadn't. And now he would spend the rest of his life understanding what it felt like to be powerless. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. Millions of people. Thousands of buildings. And somewhere in the streets below, someone was being overlooked. Ignored. Treated like they didn't matter, but they did matter. Every single one of them. And the companies that forgot that, the leaders who treated people like they were disposable, would eventually face the same reckoning Grant had faced, because power without humility wasn't power at all. It was just tyranny waiting to collapse. Alora turned away from the window and walked back to her desk. There was work to do, pensions to restore, policies to rewrite, a culture to rebuild. It would take years, maybe decades. But her father had taught her patience, had taught her that real change didn't happen overnight. It happened in the small moments, in the way you treated people when no one was watching, in the choices you made when you had all the power and they had none. She looked at the shattered vase one more time through the office window, and she decided to leave it there for one more week. Let every executive walk past it. Let them remember. Let them understand that the people they ignored today could be the ones who determined their tomorrow. Did Grant deserve forgiveness? Or did he get exactly what he earned? If you were Alora, would you have given him a second chance? Or would you have done exactly what she did? Drop your answer in the comments. Tell me what you think justice looks like when someone has all the power and uses it to destroy instead of build. Because the truth is, we all have power. Maybe not over companies, maybe not over empires, but over how we treat people, over whether we see them or ignore them, over whether we lift them up or step on them to climb higher. And the legacy we leave isn't measured in dollars or buildings or awards. It's measured in the lives we touched, the people we helped, the dignity we gave to those who society told us didn't deserve it. Alora Vance understood that. Her father had taught her, and now she would spend the rest of her life proving that business could be different, that power could be kind, that success didn't require cruelty, and that the people you thought were invisible were often the ones who saw everything.